Good morning, Southwest Minnesota growers. It is 7:30. Excited to have everybody on the call today to talk about corn fungicide considerations, especially as they relate to tar spot. We've got a number of folks that are just entering the room here. I can see attendees kind of starting to pile in, and we're going to get started here in about 1 minute. Josh, let's do a quick mic check to make sure I can hear you. If I can hear you, I'm assuming others can too.
Yeah, I got you loud and clear.
Awesome. Wonderful. And so just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. I just ask, we're all going to turn our mic or our cameras off. And so Josh will be the only person on camera during his presentation. And then we'll as agronomists, we'll fire up during the Q&A. But we've got 7:31 and it looks like we've started to level off on the attendees. And so welcome everybody. Welcome Southwest Minnesota growers. When it comes to corn fungicide considerations and tar spot management, I feel like we've got one of the best in the business here to share some of his experience when it comes to managing both of those things. I've got Field Agronomist in far southeast Minnesota, Josh Shofner. Josh has been helping people make fungicide decisions for over 15 years, and more recently, just in the last five, managing tar spot. And Josh, before this has talked about how not every year is the same when it comes to managing tar spot. 2020 for him would be like 2025 for us. So he's got 5 to 6 growing seasons on us in terms of how to manage it. Not every one of them has been the same. It certainly hasn't blown up every single year for him. And so excited to hear what Josh has to share to help us take some things to the field and make some decisions. So Josh, go ahead and take it away.
All right, I appreciate it, Alex. And yeah, thanks to your team for letting me be a part of this morning and being able to spend time with everyone. Um, so I'm going to go take a kind of a multi-tier approach this morning and talk a little bit about, corn fungicide in general. And obviously we're right in that window where applications are just starting to take place, or you're maybe trying to make that final decision on how you want to go about that. So I'll discuss that, and then I'll do a little deeper dive into tar spot. But kind of in general, there, we continue to see increase east with tar spot. Being around here, we continue to see fungicide applications rise because it is a really good tool to help manage that disease. But as Alex said too, I mean, every year is different, and we don't want to just say we're going to spray every year no matter what. There's still some decisions and step-by-step things we want to take, and I'll review that. And as that tar spot footprint continues to expand, I know it's getting out in the western part of the state. Most of you all likely seen it at your fields or had some ID locally where it's been seen. But and I'll take a pretty good deep dive into kind of what that progression looks like. Then also just some real world situations of how to manage tar spot, and if it gets progressing, kind of what you can expect there. And then obviously, talking about scouting and in-season management, which, right now we're kind of in that window, and we'll kind of take it step by step, and hopefully you can all leave here with some new insights. Oh, second here, Alex, I guess this slide is a little bit goofy. I'm not sure why, but hopefully the other slides don't look like this. I'm just going to jump ahead to here. Looks like we're okay, Alex, but I got one that's a little bit off here. But so on my screen share this morning, I did a little work on it. But one thing every year, I can't quite see the slide here, unfortunately, but I always say there's a lot of emotion around fungicide every year. And, kind of on the top there in the winter, we commonly kind of tell ourselves, hey, I'm going to prepay it. We're going to spray every acre. And we get into this time of year and maybe the commodity prices aren't where they're at. And they're like, hey, do we really want to spend another $25 to $40 an acre, on this crop? And then there's times that if we don't make that decision, we combine and say, hey, where we sprayed, we got a lot more yield, and I wish I would have sprayed everything. And sometimes that is just the cycle I go through with some producers. But ultimately, my goal today is to try to take some of the emotion out of that decision and just take a step-by-step approach and make sure we got a good game plan to make those decisions successful and as profitable as they possibly can be. So one thing before I jump into some of the steps here of managing tar spots, I was kind of thinking about this last night as I was working on the presentation of just maybe in more recent memory, kind of the drivers of high yield corn. And if I look at the last 5 years, and again, within those years, we've been battling tar spot over here in Southeast Minnesota. If I just look at, hey, what is one observation I have that's a very common theme when I run into really high yielding, cornfields? And I think when I look at those situations, there's always a common factor, and it's late season stay green and late season plant health. And I think in recent memory, there's nothing driving, new yield levels more than, hey, how do I keep that crop as healthy as possible to black layer? How do I have as much stay green? And again, we're getting more yield from that. But if you take that a step further, we're also getting, better harvestability, less in-field loss. We can manage the phantom yield loss by having optimum, moistures when we harvest better. But again, there's a lot of things that go into that. New genetics are playing a big role in that. Just good crop nutrition management, crop protection, including our fungicide applications. There's multiple contributors to that. But I think if you look at it year in, year out, how do I keep that plant as healthy as possible down the stretch is really driving yield. And I remember, 10 years ago when some of the big NCGA people were doing well, you'd see them combining, 23 or 4% corn and it's grass green. And I'm like, I don't think we'll ever see that in Minnesota this far north. But, as I look at the last few years, that lower left picture there, that's actually a September harvest of a 96-day hybrid. That's 24% corn. It's kind of hard to believe you're combining something that green that's dry, but it's really impressive. In the middle picture there, just a field last year of, this is 105-day 0529 here in this case, where it's still 24.5%, but really dry, but still a lot of plant green. And again, it's seen just kind of some of those benchmarks of seeing 300 bushel corn and new yields. It's just a big factor. So just some things that we think about fungicide playing a role in that. I think if there's anything you can do leaving here, is always look at like, hey, how do I keep my plants healthy and green till the finish? Because that's a big driver of yield. So kind of getting into, kind of that annual basis of a fungicide checklist. I'm going to kind of go through this in 3 steps. Number 1 being GDUs and scouting. Number 2, hybrid evaluation and timing. And step 3, obviously we're always going to be wanting chasing yield or yield protection, but there's also an agronomic component to these decisions that I'll get into in a little bit more depth as well. So starting off with step 1, I'm a big believer of every time we have a fungicide conversation, I want to have a GDU discussion first. And in a perfect world, I'd like to be on target for GDUs this time of year, or maybe even a little bit ahead. And that even encourages me more to utilize fungicide. When it comes to GDUs, if I maybe have a watch out, it's on a season, which we haven't had in recent memory, where maybe we're tracking into mid-July, the 1st of August, and we're well behind average, which it's been a while, but if I think back to a year like 2009, where at least where I'm at in Southeastern Minnesota, when we hit October 1st, we barely got to 2,100 GDUs, which that's kind of hard to phantom in today's world, but it can happen. But it is a situation where if, say, you're 200-300 behind and maybe we're not entering our fungicide window into early August, just how far then do we want to push this crop in advanced maturity? Doesn't happen often, but it's always a watch out. But again, if we got good GDUs, this is a great opportunity. Hey, let's get a fungicide out there. Let's keep that plant healthy, increase our late stay green, and get as much yield and starch pack and kernel depth as we possibly can. So always a good thing to review that. Again, we've had a unique year. We fired off pretty good. Month of June was cool, but now we've really rebounded and we're sitting really good on GDUs. Pairing with that, I always like to scout pre-tassel. I think it's extremely important spending time in your fields. Because obviously if we have disease presence pre-tassel, that's always a little bit of something I want to take note of. Like, hey, if we have disease presence this early, that's a long time for that disease to progress, especially if conditions stay favorable. So scouting for things like northern corn leaf blight or gray leaf spot, especially tar spot in today's world, if those diseases are present, we really want to take note and maybe kind of reevaluate what our fungicide decision is going to be there. In scouting for tar spots specifically, if you have been out in your fields, I think a lot of times when I think of northern corn leaf blight or gray, there maybe can jump out in front of you a little bit easier, maybe being at the waist high canopy or even a little bit above. But with tar spot like this time of year, you're going to start really low in the canopy, which the picture on the lower left here is kind of an example of this time of year where maybe those really low leaves are starting to just show a little bit of senescence from not getting sunlight. But usually those lowest leaves are where you might see just a couple specks of tar there. Now, if I see that, I'm going to take note and say, hey, let's come back a few days later and now start looking up the canopy where the middle picture there, I actually got a really nice gray leaf spot lesion there in the middle there as well. But you can see now I'm getting up the canopy, maybe just below the ear leaf where I got a couple specks. And then from there, I really want to just monitor progression, right? Is this a stable disease where I just got a couple specks? Is it progressing? And what I like to do if I see my first tar spot up the canopy is I like to maybe put a flag next to that plant, maybe bring a magic marker and circle that area or put a paper clip on a leaf and come back in 2 or 3 days because I just want to see, hey, I have it, but is it progressing? Because if it is progressing, that might change our timing to be a little bit more early or aggressive on that. But just some scouting tips there when you look for tar spot. Easy to identify once you see it. But again, if you're not sure, always lick your finger. If it rubs off, it's not tar spot, because these tar spot specs never do rub off if you try to get them, they're permanent, and that's your easiest way to identify tar. So once you see it once, it gets pretty easy to identify in future situations. So kind of rolling into step 2 of hybrid evaluation and application timing. I always like to review my hybrid list, mainly just look at, hey, what are my key disease scores like tar spot or northern or gray? Obviously, those are 3 very prevalent diseases. They're just like, hey, do I have a hybrid or 2 that might have a weakness in there? Not that they're weak or unfavorable, but just, hey, where's my strength? Where's my average scores? Because it might dictate where I'm scouting, or in some cases, I could growers say, hey, I'm going to spend $20,000 on fungicide. Help me direct it to get the most return on my investment. And that's where hybrid evaluation really helps make those decisions of where you're going to get the kind of just the best investment and return on that investment. And application timing, I think, is something that's extremely important all the time. I'm still a believer that in most cases, VT being 100% tassel, the R3 around that brown silk is still the sweet spot. But there are certain situations that I might jump out of those windows, and I'll get into those in a little bit more detail here. And one of those is if I have disease present and progressing, even if it's pre-tassel, that might trigger me to try to get ahead of that progression a little bit. But the other part of that application timing, as you're making that decision, always make sure you're selecting the right fungicide for the situation, that growing season, your disease spectrum. Over here in Southeast, especially since tar spot came on, we tend to stay in the very newer products, multi-modes of action, 2 or maybe even 3 in some cases, but really studying those efficacy charts. But I think that fungicide selection is really important with some of the newer diseases like tar spot. You want to have the strongest foot out there year in, year out to make sure you got that protection full season. So taking, kind of talking about that fungicide timing just one step further here, I think this is just a really good chart that Pioneer put together here through some of our resources of looking at that timing. And I kind of got highlighted here an application at VT here. So I got across the top, I got all our corn stages. We go through the months there of June, July. And then in the red there in the middle, we're just looking at the duration of a VT fungicide residual. So in most cases, probably at the max, we're going to get up to 21 days of protection. So if you go out there right when you hit VT, which is 100% tassel, as you get out there to R3.5, R4, that residual is going to start running out. And about that time it runs out, you see on the disease foliar progression, that's when it really starts ramping up. So in most cases, we really see disease presence ramp up late August through early September. And that's also when you're going to run out. So in some cases, I'm a big believer of, if I'm just going to pick a time, I'm going to shoot for R2, R2.5 if I have a healthy plant and no disease present, because then I'm getting that red out close to R5. And once we get to R5, if you have a healthy plant and disease pressure is low, you're going to make it across the home stretch in most cases. So again, if you are healthy, not seeing disease progressing, sometimes maybe waiting just 5, 7, 8 days longer, being R2 closer to R3, you can really get that protection that you're looking for into late August and the first part of September. So obviously step 3, I talked about yield and agronomics. I think there's 2 things here. Obviously, anytime we are making investment, we're hoping to get a yield benefit. And in most cases with fungicide, we're not making yield, we're just protecting the yield that's out there. So when I do look at yield, I do like to look at a crop and say, hey, if I think I have really big yield potential, that's usually going to be a favorable time for fungicide because there's just a lot more there to protect. And anytime you have a high yield environment, you're going to have increased stress to the plant. The harder those plants are pushing for yield, sometimes late, you can have down the stretch more challenges than something that isn't putting on a big crop. As I look at the last 10 years, we're seeing more and more acres. And again, where I'm at here in Southeast, it's becoming a very common practice in high performing corn acres. And really where we have high yields, we want to protect that at all costs. And fungicide has been a big component of making sure we capitalize on those large yield potentials year in, year out. But outside of yield, there are situations where agronomics is critical too. The first 2 pictures, 1 and 2 here, are actually kind of some pictures I took, pre-tar spot. These actually go back to like 2014, where we're looking at some tassel applications of fungicide. But again, anytime you make a fungicide, we want a yield benefit, but there's a huge agronomic and harvestability benefit as well. Where again, we did have a yield benefit here, but if you're looking at, hey, if I'm going to be running combine, I think everyone would say I want to be combine in the middle picture versus the left, because here, we got plants falling down. There's some stalks that have, are leaning. There's ears on the ground because the corn's down. Just harvest efficiency, minimizing, field loss. And again, you're just going to be more efficient, use less fuel, get through those acres quicker if you just got good standing corn. And on the far right there, that's just an example of, where tar spots set in late there in 2022, where you see the agronomic fall apart of that. We got a huge yield hit, but agronomically, we have corn falling down, very poor quality test weight. Other things that just went wrong because the tar spots set in, and now we got a yield and a massive agronomic issue at the same time. So once you go through those steps and you make your decision, hey, I'm going to treat my acres or not. Some of you might think that, hey, my decision's made, my job is done, but really we can't stop whether we make that decision. And especially with tar spot, you really got to scout, I think, almost up until R5, which would be, kind of almost full dent is what I'd call R5 is full dent. And the reason I say that is this disease, I think there's still benefit to treating if it's progressing almost up to R5. I don't think I treat post R5, but in some cases, a late August or like a 1st September, depending on GDU's application, can be beneficial. And when I look at situations where I may look at that or why I want to keep scouting, I have 2 pictures here on this slide. One, you see a pretty heavy infection of tar spot happening on the lower canopy. These pictures are from the same field, basically the same plant. But now if I look up in the canopy, now I see tar spots setting in the higher leaves. Okay, so in this situation, I have an infection that's progressing from the bottom up, but now as these spores have on the bottom of the leaves have resporulated, since it's a polycyclic disease, and now showers have sprayed up the plant. Now I also have infection coming aggressive from the top down. And when you think about that, for how fast this disease progress, if it's coming from the bottom up and the top down, it's going to meet in the middle. That can happen really fast. In this situation where I ran into this, I suggested a fungicide application, but it needs to happen basically within 24 to 48 hours, because its progression will be so fast that if we don't stop it that quick, we're probably not going to be able to stop it at all. So these pictures from August 25th, 2022 in Fillmore County, where, hey, this was a rare situation where I had a grower go really late, and we still had a very huge benefit from slowing that disease down, which was important. So don't stop scouting with tar spot. It's something we want to keep scouting and keep an eye on up until R5. And I mentioned that tar spot can really progress rapidly. And I think in some cases, unless you've seen its progression firsthand, it's almost hard to describe or understand. But back in 2022, I did just put up some random time-lapse cameras in some fields in July, not really knowing what I was going to catch. I really wasn't targeting this for tar spot. I was just kind of more monitoring some crop health things, and what we kind of saw here will really maybe put this into perspective of how this disease can progress. So just to tee this up, this was also just north of Maple, Minnesota. So kind of that far southeast corner. If you look at the left picture there, this is September 1st, 2022 at 9 a.m. And that's what kind of just the general canopy looked like. As you can see, we have a few tar specks on those leaves. Being at September 1st, this wasn't probably a tar spot level infection that had me majorly stressed out, but also, we still had a little ways to go to black layer here, and it was still concerning, where I was kind of curious to see how this would turn out. If you fast forward just 4 days there on the right, so now we just jumped out to September 4th, you can see, hey, there's pretty good progression here to a point where there's maybe some concern, but again, wasn't quite sure what the outcome would be. But now as we just jump ahead a couple days to September 7th, now you can see that the progression really took off in the lower left. But this sequence of September 7th to September 8th, so on the left, that's September 7th. The picture on the right is just 24 hours later, September 8th. So if you do look at how fast that disease was progressing in that situation, it just really kind of hard to get that left-right picture out of my mind of how fast it was progressing. And again, if you follow this through, after September 8th, by the 14th, it was completely, basically lost all stay green top to bottom. And that's how quick it happened. And on tar spot years like 2022 or last year, where I live here in Southeast North, it was really bad. There's situations where you drive by a field on Friday and everything looks great. And by the time you drive by it Monday, it looks like it froze off. That's how fast tar spot can take it over. So again, that late scouting, that's why scouting up until full dent or R5 is really important, because there is still time, to make a decision and maybe make an application that can benefit you. So one thing with, I think always with fungicide, coverage is important, but I think with tar spot, um, coverage becomes extremely important if when you're making an application. If I kind of look at just application methods, I feel like ground applied fungicide application is on the rise as we've got more clearance equipment out there. Growers having their own equipment to do that, and we've had good success with that. I also see drone applications rising rapidly. I think probably one of the fastest growing segments out there. And obviously, we still have our helicopter and airplane. And I think the one thing I'm going to say here is we need all of these, right? There's not enough ground rigs to cover the acres. There's not enough drones to cover it all. We need to utilize all of these to get across the acres, and they all have a huge benefit. But when I think about coverage, one thing I've ran into, especially with tar spot, is it is important if you're hiring your applications done aerial or with a drone or airplane or helicopter, you're just having conversations with your supplier like, hey, what else are we putting in the tank with that application? Is there any chance it can affect the spray pattern? Do we need to have, maybe an adjusted, width pattern depending on what we're adding? And the one thing I want to just point out too with a fungicide application, on any fungicide label, we don't need anything else but fungicide there. Okay. So it doesn't require a surfactant. I'm not discouraging it, but it's not necessarily needed. We don't need drift reduction agents. But sometimes when you add all that, you can affect the pattern. That can have a big impact. And if you do look at that kind of that plant health imagery picture I took there, this is just a situation where we had a heavy tar spot field that was sprayed via helicopter. And in this case, they did add a drift reduction agent that did affect the pattern where maybe they should have narrowed up. But here you can see all these streaks. This is just from where we had a product in the tank that affected our pattern. And it had a huge impact on performance, pass to pass. Still had great benefit from the fungicide, but the misapplication of the pattern really had a huge hit. The other thing I do want to mention too, when you make a fungicide application this time of year, always have a discussion about insecticide. While you're scouting for a disease, be looking for rootworm beetles, because it is a great opportunity to add another layer to just an overall integrated pest management, control the corn rootworm as well. And like I said, we're in Southeast Minnesota, we are heavy rootworm year in, year out. It's a very common practice that we utilize an adult beetle control application while we're doing that. And in most cases, insecticides aren't going to have a pattern effect, but again, really have a surfactant drift reduction conversation with your supplier to make sure you don't end up with a pattern like this, which had a huge, impact on the bottom line of that producer's productivity. And here's just some examples I took back in 2022 of kind of multiple application methods. In this case, I'm using my UAV drone deploy plant health to kind of take these. And the one thing I want to point out here, in all of these situations, the applications were still highly benefit, great yield impact, great improvement, but I just want to go through a few things here. So on the lower left here, this is a field that was applied with a drone application. And again, you can see some of the pattern was kind of east-west here. Some was north-south, just from the base of the lay of the land of this field here. We have a lot of crooked, imperfect fields down here. And again, you can see a little bit of a pattern with the drone. But again, overall, that drone performed very well. We had a great corn there, good tar spot control. But again, it is showing, hey, we still have a little bit of coverage pattern things. And the newer drones, the newer nozzles, and the way they pattern the field, they're getting better and better every year. So that's been good to see. Back to the helicopter picture, this was actually a unique thing where this is the same picture before the pattern. But here you can also see they did a second trip 14 days after the first one where they went east-west against that. And again, that had a huge benefit of, covering up some of the pattern issues, but also in a heavy tar spot, 2 applications in rare cases can be a benefit. But again, still saw some benefits, but again, that pattern thing is there. When you do see a ground rig application, a lot of those patterns do go away, right? You might see patterns of tillage or some residue management, but you maybe don't see the plant health patterns, partially because we got good coverage, and having 20 gallons an acre of a carrier, you just get more coverage and consistent uniform coverage. So again, all of them help, but are there benefits to a ground rig and carrier volumes? There certainly are. And even with aerial, if they're willing to spray 2 gallons versus 1 or 3 versus 2, I would make that investment with tar spot and get coverage at all costs. It's extremely important. So one thing, just some other pictures from that same year of just looking at, hey, how effective are fungicides on tar spot? And the short answer is they are very effective. And just a couple of pictures here of some plant health imagery. The one on the left here, I got a couple arrows pointing out, but you see a couple of green streaks here, and these are actually steep terraces in this field. And this was applied via helicopter. So you can see as he was flying, he had to jump, kind of climb up over those terraces where the fungicide missed and there wasn't good coverage. And it has a big impact, right? So I don't have any great side by side trials of this where we set them up, but here where we have no one misses from where they have to jump up over that, you can see where we missed. We had huge impact from tar. Where we had coverage out here, we had a really good performance. The other thing I want to point out here is, when you are thinking about tar spot, maybe as you start thinking about seed decisions for next year, obviously we score our hybrids. That's really good information. But starting with an average score or above average score, it does help it, right? Where in this situation, I had 3 different hybrids blocked off in the field here. On the left here, I had an average tar spot hybrid with fungicide. And again, this field overall performed well. We had a few challenges from the terraces where we couldn't get coverage. But again, in this situation, in the middle field where we had good coverage, we had relatively really good corn and performance. Now you go to the middle here where I had an above average tar spot score with fungicide. Yeah, we definitely see an improvement there. And again, the disease gets a little bit easier to manage with fungicide where we layer those two things together. Now on the right, where we have a very susceptible tar spot hybrid with fungicide, in that situation, we struggled where in this case, the fungicide, even by itself, wasn't able to overcome the tar spot pressure we had there. Where in this case, yeah, maybe a second application could have been beneficial. But again, when you're average and you have an average tar spot score or above, managing it with one pass of fungicide is going to be achievable probably 95 to 98% of the time. Where if you are highly susceptible, in some cases, you want to be scouting after that first application. In some cases, a second application can be beneficial. So back to that 2-pass thing. I get this question a lot. Should I plan on 2 passes? And my answer to that is I never want to plan on 2 passes. We can avoid it. I will say in certain situations it can be beneficial. And again, it's going to come back to, susceptible hybrids, heavy pressure will be the thing. And again, also try to use your timing, your coverage things, make sure you got all that taken care of to also avoid that. But again, back to that situation where we did 2 passes. Yeah. In a susceptible hybrid, or we came back a second time, we did see a 25 bushel jump. And again, I didn't have an uncontrolled check, but that's on top of the first trip, which probably also had a 20 to 30 bushel bump as well, even despite the application pattern. So again, just goes back to even when you make that application, we can't stop scouting until R5. And the other thing I just want to point out here, we have tremendous resources at Pioneer. Your local Pioneer sales rep, your local agronomy Pioneer team, we have so much information on this of like, hey, ground truthing our scores and trials. Like, hey, are the scores correlating to performance? What is fungicide doing, to certain scores? There's just some images of some things I did in 22. We have more and more and more of that since then. But again, our agronomy summary books that we publish every fall are great resources. Talk to your rep, talk to your local field agronomist. We just have a treasure trove of information to help you get through this. And at the end of the day, I don't want tar spot to be something that fears you. We're becoming more effective of managing this year in, year out. But again, utilize your hybrid selections, utilize your fungicides, get the right timing, use the right products, use the right surfactants, make sure you're not affecting pattern. If you can do all those things and follow those steps, you'll be successful in managing tar spot year in, year out. So again, just kind of looking ahead, summary there, utilize the checklist I talked about, review your disease tolerance of your portfolio here before you make some decisions here the next 5-10 days, and really point through there, just be in your fields. I know it's not always the funnest time to be scouting, but man, the more time you can be in your fields watching what's happening, just the better you're going to get at understanding disease and fungicide applications and the benefit. And again, timing, product selection, coverage, that's what fungicide is all about. Extremely important. Whether you have tar spot or not, it's important. And just try to maximize those things. These are relatively large dollar investments, and we want to make sure we apply them right and get the most bang for a buck.
Well, thank you, Josh. We've got 15 minutes here allocated for Q&A. And so if you've got a question that you still have for Josh or any of the agronomy team as we pull our cameras up, go ahead and type those into the Q&A, and I'll monitor that and manage that. But just in summary, well, first of all, thank you, Josh, for those insights. I think one of my take homes, back to the farm would be, we're going to want to be scouting. We've got reports of a few tar spot stroma, a few of these lesions that we're finding in the lower canopy now across Southwest Minnesota. Some misidentified, but I would say a number of confirmed, single spots, very low infestation. My message back to growers, and I think yours as well, would be that's no cause for alarm, but it's cause to get out in the field and start scouting and continue to monitor things because and monitor those through R5. If we're not if we're not a traditional fungicide applicator, we're probably going to want to continue to monitor through R5. If we do traditionally put a fungicide on, maybe we want to delay that to that R2, 2.5, and plan on just a little bit later so we can grab some extra coverage for end of August, et cetera. And we might just get away with a single fungicide application a lot of the time. Um, Josh, I think one of the things you talked about was we've probably got to get we've got to now that it's here, we've got to accept a certain level of background tar spot every single year. We're going to see it at harvest. It's going to be around, and we can't expect to see none for probably the foreseeable future. Is that correct?
Yeah, since we've had it, the first time I saw tar spot was 2020. And again, it was just a single field, a speck or two in September, no big deal. But since then, um, I would say probably 95% of the fields at harvest every year since then, we have tar spot present in every single field every year at harvest. Again, not that it's all yield limiting, not that it's all bad, but its presence is going to be there. And even on a year that is dry like 2023, which we didn't see a lot through July and August, the first rain we got in September, it wasn't 5, 6 days. It kind of just popped up in every field. And it was probably the effects there was coming, but it's always going to show up, near black layer almost every year in every field.
Wonderful. So I'm getting a few questions here about can you discuss the best fungicide products? Number one, which fungicide mode of action do you feel is the most important for tar spot control, especially as we consider other corn diseases as well? Yeah, can you what products would you recommend? So there's three questions there.
Yeah.
We'll throw at you.
Yeah, I know I briefly mentioned in the presentation, staying with newer multi-modes of action, and I don't have experience with every single product there, but since we've had tar spot, I mean, in Southeast Minnesota, we basically, our products are very narrow. There's 5 or 6 there from, I think Veltima, if I just look at it, very good success on it, but Veltima, Delero Complete, Nervous Neo, Approach Prima, which does extremely well on tar spot, and Triber Pro. I mean, in Southeast Minnesota, that probably encompasses 98% of our products being used. And since tar spot, we just stay in those very newer products, multi-mode of action, where we have a lot of data and information to trust those products. But like I said, outside of that spectrum, I probably don't have a lot of comments. I do utilize like the Crop Protection Network's efficacy guide. I would take a look at that of any product you choose and kind of review that. But I don't have experience with all of them. But like I said, those products I mentioned, over in Southeast Minnesota encompass almost every acre we cover is those. And we just don't veer from that because we just need the most comprehensive multi-mode of action newest products on the market to control the disease we deal with year in, year out over here in Southeast.
No, that's wonderful. Is there would you say is there from a generic standpoint, some single mode of action generics? We were talking yesterday in our preparation. There's some applications out there that Matt Benda, maybe you've been seeing some out there where maybe we're not putting a product out there that has got efficacy on even some of the diseases we see every year, like northern corn leaf blight. And maybe you want to talk a little about that.
Yeah, I think the big thing is a lot of producers are ramped up and really motivated because they see the yield potential that's out there in this crop, and it's pretty exciting. So I've had a lot of questions, and a lot of producers talk to me about, hey, is it, I'm willing to go and spray a quilt extra twice, and is that going to be the best benefit? And I think you need to go back to the graph that Josh showed about keeping the residual piece. He talked about going, VT and even sliding that back to the R2 stages to make sure that that residual piece is there and just understand, the difference. If you're using like a quilt product, you're looking at 14 days. If you're using one of the three modes of action, you're going to be more effective, especially on a northern corn leaf blight. Tar is going to probably be pretty equivalent, maybe a little bit better on those three modes because of the residual piece. You're talking 25, 28 days there. So again, scout those fields, know what you're looking at. I think Josh framed it up really good about, hey, that if you get leaves that look like this in one of those pictures, this is the gotta go moment. So until you get to that point, if you can move that residual back and utilize those 25 to 28 days, encompass the late season plant health that Pioneer has that advantage of, we can easily manage this. So again, it's great that a lot of producers are ramped up and motivated to go out and spray. I'd love to see it. It's just let's try to hone in on that timing a little bit better than maybe than just going out there and just wildly throwing fungicide everywhere. So
Appreciate that. Josh, by applying a fungicide, are you able to limit tar spot pressure in the area in the future?
Um, no, I don't think so. And once tar spot is present in your residue and in the soil, its overwintering capability is good. Um, yeah, high uses of fungicide isn't going to reduce potential pressure in the future. And it just goes back to the disease triangle, right? If you have the presence there, it's always there. And then it more boils down to that environmental effect. If the environment's right, you're going to see it. But I really don't think there's any methods of crop rotation, fungicide use that's going to change its presence year in, year out. But now with that said, I will say, like, as I talked about, an integrated approach of hybrid selection, utilizing the right fungicide at the right time. If you get better at management over time, I think the massive yield limiting issues do go down because our management gets better. But anything we do doesn't change the potential pressure of it.
That's a good
Josh,
point.
Alex,
Go ahead, Matt.
the one question that I'll constantly get, and the differences between your environment, Josh, versus like where we'll cover all the way out to the South Dakota border is late season moisture, right?
Mhm.
And part of this tar spot, that disease triangle is, 7 to 10 hours of continued wetness on that leaf, where you typically get to see more late season moisture, and particularly August. Can you talk about framing it up? I mean, right now, as it's raining again here where we're at
Mhm.
this morning, we're seeing good moisture, which is also motivating a lot of producers to keep an eye on this. But can you elaborate a little bit more on late season moisture? What happens if all of a sudden we go to 2 weeks of
Mhm.
dryness in August? Does it really slow it down, or once you have that infestation, hey, we're on track and this is going to happen one way or another?
Yeah, tar spot's unique, and I know we do have like a moisture component. If you just read about tar spot, what are its ideal conditions? Leaf wetness, temperature range, moisture. I mean, I think there's a general guideline to that, but sometimes tar spot can be unpredictable. And if I just use last year for an example, okay, we had pretty good moisture all year long. Had early moisture, midsummer moisture, late moisture, and I thought it was all teed up for Southeast to have a challenge. And our weather didn't vary that much than from where I live north, but from where I live north, it was like ground zero nuclear white, tar spot, southeast, we saw it late, but I'm just like, how can it be different? Our rainfall totals are the same, our temperatures don't vary. But sometimes it also like I just think there can be other triggers of just timing of a heavy rain in early June that maybe gets the initial infection going. And then it may not take perfect conditions for 30 days, but maybe a certain rainfall or wetness can keep it going. But sometimes I think there's still a lot to learn about tar spot. And sometimes like I can have all check every box of should we have it or not, and we should and we don't. And then I can miss two of them, and all of a sudden it's really, really bad. So I think there's still some things where we're still learning on that, on the exact trigger. But yeah, don't get me wrong. I do think the environment in the Southeast is probably a little more annually conducive to it, just for our rainfall patterns, but also our crop is much taller year in, year out. We probably don't get quite as many breezy days as you get out there from the hills. There's still a few things that maybe favor it here, but that doesn't mean that it won't happen out there either. I think it's just a matter of the right growing season. You're going to have a year that we've dealt with in the past too.
That's no, good comment there. We've got, I'd say 5, 10 minutes. We'll keep answering as long as there's people on and questions coming in. But Josh, how often do you scout a field knowing that this thing is acting fast? Is once a week sufficient to start?
Yeah, I think in most cases it can be. If you do like this time of year, if I have a field where I see, and again, you got to look at scalability. I can't look at every field, but that's why I really encourage producers to get engaged in their fields. But if I have a field like, say, I saw it, yesterday, I'm going to probably wait a full week. Okay. Now, as I get into August and we know we're in progression, if I look at it like, hey, I think I progressed, say it's August 15th, and I think it progressed from the 10th to the 15th, I'm probably going to come back 2 days later because if it keeps progressing, I need to make a decision very quick. Where, as I've talked to some producers at farm shows that have maybe dealt with in other parts of the country, like I remember I had a husband and wife at a farm show that came up to me, we were talking tars, but he's like, we left for vacation on August 24th one year on a Friday, and I came back Monday and it looked like my crop died. He's like, I left feeling like I had the best corn crop I ever had. And I came back 3 days later and it looked like my corn froze off. He's like, so again, as you get further into August, I would make that more frequent.
Awesome.
Every couple days.
More frequent scouting as
Mhm.
the season progresses.
Correct.
Getting a couple in here about time of day, morning, night, high dew. Another one here, temperature range that you should or shouldn't apply. Do you have some guidelines there?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything. There's not a smoking gun there, and sometimes when we got to cover acres, you can't just be picture perfect in everything. But I don't know if I have. I know sometimes there are applications. I have some people that might try to go right as the dew is burning off. I think there's an advantage there, but at the end of the day, I would go back to utilize the right product, utilize the right carrier, know what's in the tank, and just follow that versus certain time of day or temperature ranges. I just think sometimes it's just some of that's out of our control. And if you got good conditions, take advantage of it.
Perfect.
Josh, just to add to that, some guys, I feel like guys hesitate to spray when there is a dew, but I guess I encourage people if it's in the morning and there's a dew, I have no problem with spraying that. The dew is going to slowly evaporate. The fungicide is going to get into that dew and slowly evaporate with it. So I guess unless you disagree, I have no problem with them spraying with the dew. People want to wait until that's gone, but I say go if it's early in the morning for that.
Yep, I don't disagree at all.
So where would be some typical locations in a field that would show first? Is it edges, low-lying areas? I think this is kind of getting to, if we're going to choose to go out and scout, every 7 days to begin with, and maybe every, 4 or 5 days towards the end of August, what areas should we just be targeting to go find it?
Yeah.
Is there a rotational situation where we should be looking at as well?
Yeah, low elevation. I sometimes tend to utilize waterways. We have a lot of waterways over here in the east where I tend to utilize them to drive up and down and find the lower spots. It's just an easy spot to just dart in and take a look. Crop rotation wise, no difference there. I don't think there's any difference in potential pressure corn on corn versus corn on beans. Scout them equally. But yeah, if you're just going to like, hey, I want to be efficient scouting and you just want to target areas, target the low spotted fields first.
Okay. Low-lying areas that would probably carry a heavy dew or a fog.
Heavy dew. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Would you recommend a fulvic acid or any other adjuvants specifically to help the penetration of the fungicide?
In most cases, I just suggest just straight goods fungicide. And the reason I say that, someone just comes back to the unpredictability of pattern. If you're with a ground rig, a lot of that goes away. If you're aerial, not that I'm stubborn, it's just at the end of the day, we're spending $25 to $40 an acre on that. And the biggest bang for the buck in the tank is that fungicide. I want to make sure it's applied correct.
What do you see? So you had some examples of where, let's say you've got a 40-foot boom, but they're taking a 50-foot swath because they're calibrated, they believe, with a dye, like you were telling me, they calibrate with water and a dye to say, I got a 40-foot boom, but a 50-foot coverage. But those adjuvants can narrow that up. And where the fungicide didn't get as good a coverage, tar spot was able to come in and actually and infest a little bit worse. What were you seeing for yield detriments in the areas that just didn't get as good coverage because of the adjuvant load?
Yeah, in that case, it was an adjuvant and drift reduction agent combination. But in those red streaks where we didn't get coverage on those passes, we were off 30 to 50 bushel, depending on were we catching the full miss or catching partial. But it was absolutely massive. Grower said like, hey, we got to find a way to do this better. He knows fungicide was good and glad we still got some covered. But you just gotta you just got to watch those things, ask questions and personally, I think this has been going on. I don't have proof of this, but I think we've probably been having aerial coverage, challenges for a while. And I think tar spot just exposed it. It's made the only disease that it's so aggressive that you can truly see it, where it becomes, maybe you can see it. This one is black and white. You can see it.
So you'd hate for a few dollars. We would all hate for a few dollars of adjuvants to cost you if tar spot ends up blowing up, man, you're spending all that money. You'd hate for a few dollars to cost you those bushels.
Yep. Or narrow up the pattern to make sure you're good, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Question here about foliar feeding late season. We've got our own internal next program at R2. How does that interact with fungicides in the tank mix? And is there a nutrient profile in the corn that has been shown to discourage tar spot incidents, where if we get the corn plant to a certain level of health on various nutrients, that we can actually stave off tar spot?
I don't have any firsthand experience with that. And sometimes with tar spot, I always it's unique disease where sometimes diseases, can maybe attack a plant that has a challenge or a deficiency or something that has another stressor, where I sometimes feel like tar spot just chases high yield environments, so in some cases, I almost think the more robust growth, the healthier plant, the more yield potential you have. It just seems like tar spot chases it because that's the environment that it thrives in, right? Robust plants, lush, good stands, good growth, more an environment that's going to trap moisture. I almost think some cases, the better you manage, the more potential you bring to tar spot in some cases. Not that I don't want to have all that. It's just that's going to create an environment that's going to match its disease profile and disease triangle a little bit more.
A little like white mold maybe in beans, right? Higher yield, higher incidence.
I would say that's a decent correlation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you think a ground rig overall is the best application method?
If I had a choice to choose in every situation, like I said, there's not enough of them to cover every acre, and they're all beneficial. But yeah, if every grower gave me a choice, 20 gallons an acre in a ground rig, I'll take it every day of the week, especially when you're dealing with things like tar spot. Because when you do look at aerial or drone or ground rig, when you get tar spot, you can see the penetration layer, right? Like when I see a drone applied, I know I'm going to see a layer probably one leaf above the ear leaf where that penetration may have stopped, okay? And sometimes you can see that with helicopter or airplane too, where the ground rig, you'll commonly see that line drop below the ear leaf, maybe one or two leaves. You can see that's how much penetration we had. And I also commonly see with aerial too, like I went through my phone to find a picture, I couldn't find it, but every fall I'll see where like I'll have a leaf and I like have a 4-inch band of solid tar than nothing. And that's just where a leaf covered that leaf, where the fungicide didn't hit it like an umbrella effect. But you'll see that really commonly with aerial applications where you don't have that level of push and penetration to kind of fog that down in there. But those are just some things you'll see with coverage and, when you look at all three of them. But again, they all can have a huge benefit, but it's just tough to beat the coverage of a ground rig. And you cover it fence line to fence line, where for us, where we have woods and trees and everything, sometimes you just can't get an aerial applicator in there. It's not their fault. You just can't get that close.
So Josh, since you've started managing tar spot in 2020, this is your 6th season managing tar spot. 2025 would be. So in the previous 5 seasons, 2020 through 2024, how many years has it blown up on you versus it's just there, not yield limiting?
I've had 3 years of yield limiting fields, but one where it was, a full-fledged blow up of mass proportions. Had 2 years where it's a little more isolated, maybe just had a handful of fields that really got hit. And then 2022, it was widespread and very, very prevalent. So where we had fields that were off 100, 120 bushel an acre, right? I mean, we had, you could have hybrid selection and fungicide side by side and see 120, 130 bushel differences just to the row of, hybrid to hybrid or, things like that where, there's a lot of 120, 30 bushel corn. That's how severe it was on a year that across the fence, it might've been 250 just because of different hybrids and different fungicide management. It can be that big.
Wonderful. Does your timing recommendations change for corn harvested early for silage or high moisture?
Not really. we have a lot of corn silage dairies over here where we commonly use fungicide, but no, it doesn't really change my timing. I would still base the same factors. Yeah, if I have disease present early and progressing, I might move up my application, but we're still going to target R2 if we don't have disease present progressing in that window almost all the time.
Wonderful. The fungus, there's a fungicide timing pilot model, and it's asking me to do a application for some corn on corn that's just barely starting to tassel. It feels a little early to me. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've done some of those pilot trials the last couple of years, and did one last year where we did the timing thing where we followed the model and maybe then used the grower practice who was going to target a little bit more like a late R1, R2, and yeah, in that situation, the model going early was parity performance to that. Wasn't a heavy disease pressure field, but it has been interesting as we look at those timing things. I wouldn't discredit them in most cases. I've never seen it perform worse than what the grower was assigning to do. So I think there's some value there. We're still learning. But yeah, it's fun to watch that where those models they haven't set us the wrong direction yet. It's kind of interesting to see where I've done the trials. They've kept us on par every time.
Awesome. Josh, we're getting a request here. Can you just maybe briefly list the products that you mentioned as well, the the trade names of the fungicides that you say are maybe wouldn't be all encompassing, but it was certainly the ones that come to your top of your head for being
Yeah.
good on top spot.
Yeah, and just know this is just kind of locally in Southeast that these are the products that we primarily run into and utilize, with the disease, portfolio that we deal with. But yeah, our most common ones are Veltima, Mirvis Neo, Delero Complete, still some Headline Amp, Approach Prima, and Trivapro. Like I said, that probably covers way more than 90% of the acres we cover over here is those products is what we utilize.
Appreciate that. This one here, I just sprayed my corn fungicide yesterday afternoon and received 2 inches of rain last night. Will I still have a good residual, good enough to manage tar spot?
It's a futuristic question. I mean, the rainfall didn't hurt them. It just obviously, rain and at this time of year and cooler temperatures might favor disease. But it just goes back to just why we got to keep scouting, right? You just got to take it, day by day, scout it every week or a little bit more frequently down the stretch and see how it goes out. But a lot of it'll just depend on the environment the rest of the year. I don't think there's a way to predict whether it'll be, 100% effective or, will it get you to the finish line or not, I think is TBD.
Okay. If I do 2 passes of fungicide on my corn, will I be extending my hybrid maturity come harvest? And if 2 passes are made, should we change up our mode of action? So my first pass is I'm planning on Veltima or Mirvis Neo. What should we come back with for mode of action on the second pass?
Yeah, always want to change it up. And usually by rule of thumb, we just never use the same product twice, right? Try to, whether maybe we use a 3 mode of action first, come back with a 2 or vice versa. Just don't ever layer the same thing back to back. So study your products and modes of action, but always change them up. Don't ever duplicate because it just runs the risk of resistance. What was the second part of that question, Alex?
Second part of that question was, let's see here. Will 2 passes of fungicide extend my maturity?
Oh, yeah, extend maturity. Yeah, I mean, there's 2 ways to look at that. Okay, anytime you make a fungicide application, we usually do extend it out, right? And you do see that, and in most cases, if you got good GDUs, that's a great thing, right? Now, if you're going to make 2 applications, you're likely I would hope you're doing it because you're chasing disease pressure. Which in that case, if you're chasing disease pressure, you're likely some of that stress of losing, leaf greenness and stay green is probably going to, start to balance out. But in on a low disease year, 2 trips, yeah, you're going to extend it significantly. I would say at 25%, 26% corn, you're going to see all of 2.5 points of moisture. Now, again, as you get down to 22 or 20% corn, that's going to continue to narrow. But at 25% corn, you're going to see a pretty big gap, and you're going to extend it out there. But again, that's I just don't know why we'd make 2 trips if we don't have disease pressure either.
Right. Yeah, that's a good call. Unless we have the disease pressure, 2 trips are really should not be planned.
Mm.
So what carrier rates should we shoot for with guys that have their own ground rigs? Should we shoot for 15, 20, 25?
I'm 20 every day of the week. If you ask me, it's always going to be 20.
Cool. Final question here, unless we get any more coming in the next minute. I plan to spray some of my acres. Should I spray my most susceptible tar spot hybrids first? Some products from other companies generally seem to be more susceptible.
It's that. I mean, again, I always like to review that, right? And I do have growers that, hey, we're going to pick and choose here. I think the biggest thing you got to remember is, in general, when you look at fungicide, even outside of disease, we see benefits across all ranges of products, right? I think it's something where I think every acre can benefit, and you can see a good yield response. So then it also comes down to, well, you could look at it like, hey, maybe I have some below average products, which I don't think that's a bad thing to target those, but if you have other acres that are better, but they're looking really good and high yielding, I think it's maybe a bit of a mistake to pass over those acres too, because there's a lot more to protect, right? If you got a susceptible hybrid on a historically 220 bushel situation versus a really strong disease hybrid on a 280 bushel potential thing, I'm going to go probably spray the 280 every day of the week because I want to capture that. There's a lot more to protect there. So it's a loaded question where I don't like to back myself in that corner, but don't get me wrong. If we're going to pick and choose some acres, I mean, yeah, I'm going to look at all those factors, but I'm going to go through all those factors first before we just pick it on the Z-score.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I think something that one of our product lifecycle managers mentioned when it comes to tar spot is we do find, and it is true, we do find that Pioneer hybrids do tend to perform the best in the industry when it comes to tar spot. But that doesn't mean that we're bulletproof. And so make sure you're still scouting things. There's an analogy, and I hope this hits everybody with just a little bit of humor because that's how Mike would want it to land. But we're all going to have a funeral, but the difference is that I just get to attend yours. And so that's maybe, we might get ourselves another week, 10 days with just genetics, and genetics are improving. But no, that's a great question. And I think, one where we're going to want to make sure we still protect our highest yielding acres. So with that is all the questions that we've got, we've answered. Hopefully you found some things in here, a nugget or two that helps, number one, give you guys some more confidence in managing tar spot. If you have a planned fungicide application, let's maybe look at delaying it just a little bit to buy ourselves some, we just don't know what's going to happen. And so if it blows up late season, we're going to want to have had maybe an R2, R2.5 versus a VT application. If you do have a VT application, let's increase our scouting higher than we typically are used to in that August timeframe. We're going to want to be scouting until R5. That's important because there are still, if this thing does end up blowing up late season, we can still see some benefits from it. I'm with Matt and Troy and Brent, and we all agree that Western Minnesota is different than Southeastern. And Josh, you've had it blow up on you a couple times in the last 5 growing seasons, maybe 2 to 3. We're of the opinion we're probably going to be dealing with it blowing up less than that. Just as soon as I say that, I'll be wrong. I don't want to give you the impression that we'll never have to manage it. It might be a 1 in 10, it might be a 1 in 15, who knows? But we'll want to be there for it because we certainly can't afford the yield loss if it does come in and set in aggressively. So it's something we're going to be, as an industry, watching. Another summary item is that just because your neighbor's spraying 10 miles away doesn't mean you're going to have to. Josh, you told me over the phone yesterday that just 10 miles away it was ground zero, and you guys really didn't have much. And so you really have to scout on a localized basis. And using I would say watch the adjuvant loads and use name brand multi-mode of action fungicides, and you're going to be just fine. So hopefully in the end here, you've got some decision tools. Always reach out to your local Pioneer agronomist, your local Pioneer sales rep. They are here. I would say they're local consulting groups as well. We're all here to help you and help keep farmers farming for the duration. So with that, thank you everybody. Thank you to Josh. Thank you to our panel, and we'll let you back to your Wednesday. And yes,
Hey, Alex, can I add one more comment quick?
Sure.
just with our conversation too on keeping fungicide till R2, I think plays well into if we would possibly see southern rust again. And we did have pretty significant southern rust last year in Southwest Minnesota that led to some limiting factors. Now, I've always been saying I won't expect to see it again for another 10 or 15 years just because it normally doesn't make it this far north. That being said, I was just looking at the iPipe map for southern rust, and it is in central Iowa. So, or they've confirmed it there in about 4 counties. And so I think it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on there too, is not only tar spot, but also southern rust. I think if we do wait till that, if you are planning a fungicide and you're waiting till more of um, that R2 timing, I think that could play well with the southern rust thing too, if we get it. I'm not going to say we're going to get it or anything like that, but I think we do need to be cognizant of that. I would not have expected it again, but it is in central Iowa, so something we'll have to keep an eye out for as well.
Perfect. Final question came through. Is this recorded and will it be available? The answer is yes. We will get this into all of the sales reps' hands. And so if you are interested in seeing this again, reach out to your local Pioneer sales rep or shoot one of us a direct line and we can get you the copy. But with that, it's 8:31. We've gone a bit over, but we've had plenty of folks stay on the line and happy to have the group we've had this morning. Thank you again, and good luck the rest of the season.